That's not surprising, actually, is it? You know, the person that they thought they had, you know, was this escaped suicide bomber. He was in that block of flats. You know, they knew where he was. It's not surprising that they're in a state of thinking this is very serious. I don't think there's evidence of sort of tremendous, you know, machismo from reading it. Actually, it was sort of just this shambles of, you know, confusion and of you know, the fact that at the key moment the police officer, you know, has gone off for a wee behind the bushes. Just, I think, you know, that was what it was about, actually, was the sort of, you know, the chaos, rather than, I think, a lot of sort of pumped up, you know, police officers going out, you know, deliberately to see who they could get.
No, it's not necessarily about seeing who they deliberately could get, but remember, after the shooting, we became aware of Operation Kratos, the shoot-to-kill policy. Before then, there would be no public discussion or debate or in any way, whether through the parliamentary processes or through the Metropolitan Police Authority, discussion of this new policy and new procedure that police officers would be able to use lethal force without necessarily without the normal constraints that we have in terms of reasonable suspicion before being able to use it. Now, there's still a debate about whether Operation Kratos was in force on that day or not on that day, and that's hopefully one of the issues that we're going to find out more about in terms of the inquest. But I do think, yes, you're right. I mean, it is partly, you know, ineptitude of the whole policing on that day, complete communication failures. We heard about chaotic scenes in the control room, the firearms unit not even being in the right place for 4 hours, even though the firearms.
Well, so we did get a lot of these details from the trial, and it seems as though the press has used that as an opportunity to go into great detail. I mean, the Mail included that big spread inside. It gives a blow-by-blow account of what went wrong.
Well, it is. I mean, it is sort of fascinating and awful, and once you start to go through those sort of 19 points, you can see what was with this sort of ghastly inevitability. You know, that had they at the beginning just been at the right place, so that when the guy comes out, they can identify him at close quarters. He can be, you know, all should have been so different, and in fact, it was just chaos.
Okay, well,
absolutely. And more importantly, if they'd followed their own procedure, if he had been a suicide bomber, he should never have been allowed to enter the bus in the first place.
Let's just turn to a comment piece in the Times. You see, first of all, they have this cartoon here with Sir Ian Blair down the corner saying, the speech bubble, can you see it there? Not me, Gov, with Target Stockwell in the centre of the cartoon. But over to the right, we have David Davis, who's the Shadow Home Secretary, who Sarah just mentioned there, writing a comment piece for the Times. And he says this: Sir Ian Blair has been a controversial commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. And you're seeing shots here of the scenes outside the tube station after the shooting. So David Davis says that past brushes with controversy of Sir Ian Blair include covert tape recording of calls with the Attorney General. In 2005, Sir Ian lobbied for an extension of police powers of detention, which he says is another example. And he says immediately after the killing of Jean-Charles de Menezes, Sir Ian's force failed to tell the public the truth. He told his officers not to cooperate with the Independent Police Complaints Commission, blocking access to the investigation scene. On each occasion, says David Davis, I faced pressure to call for Sir Ian's resignation, and on each occasion I refused. However, the prosecution of the Met for killing Mr. de Menezes disclosed systemic failings of a different order at the centre of Britain's counter-terrorism capability. And he concludes this piece by saying the trial judge described these multiple errors as corporate failing. They covered resourcing, organisation, communications, training and the tactics on the day. As Commissioner, Sir Ian bears responsibility for such serious and systemic failings. The public must have confidence in Britain's most senior police officer who's entrusted with national security. Sir Ian has lost that trust. His position is no longer tenable. Regrettably, it is time for him to resign. Now, Sarah, in the same way as I said, it's not usual for us to see the Daily Mail gunning for the Britain's top cop. It's not usual to see Tory party spokesman doing so either. What's the future for Sir Ian Blair? Can he survive?
Well, he's had the support of the Home Secretary, Jackie Smith. I don't think Gordon Brown has said anything yet, and that may be significant.
He's keeping his powder dry, like some of the other papers.
He's powder dry. The point about Blair is that he was a great favourite of Tony Blair. And I think all that is sort of significant. And it did mean that I think the reason David Davis, particularly, again, the Tories are always very strong on law and order, but there was something about this man which meant that he changed the culture of the police force. And in the end, it was all about politics and it wasn't about simple policing. And I think this was, therefore, in a way, a sort of inevitable conclusion.
And Asad, do you think that this is really, putting Ian Blair to one side, is this going to change the Met? Is this going to change policing in Britain?
Well, hearing senior officers during the trial who said that they would have done everything completely the same, they had no regret about their actions, and the words of Sir Ian Blair when he left the Old Bailey, saying that basically this was not some sort of corporate failure. There was not an even acceptance of the seriousness of the charges. Well, I'd hope that there's going to be a full review, but I'm not very confident under the leadership of Sir Ian Blair that will happen. I find very interesting is whilst the Daily Mail and the Conservatives have come out asking for Ian Blair to resign, that the traditional people who you would see as being maybe more sympathetic to victims of police malpractice, people like Ken Livingstone, are wholly supportive of Sir Ian Blair. And for a politician who made his name during the 70s on shoot-to-kill policy and protesting about such policing issues, for him to line up and be basically writing a blank cheque to Sir Ian Blair saying, I'm fully
Well, that's because he was their man.
Absolutely. I think it's an interesting party,
Yeah.
He's caught between the sort of party politics.
Well, Asad mentioned there Sir Ian Blair talking after the verdict came in yesterday, and we're just going to see what he had to say for himself after that verdict came in outside the Old Bailey yesterday.
What we're going to do now is to take time to consider whether and how any of our current operating practices need to be altered in the light of this conviction. Our first priority, as always, remains the safety of the public. It's important to remember that no police officer set out on that day to shoot an innocent man. I am certain that this death was the culmination of actions by many hands, all of whom were doing their best to handle the terrible threat facing London on that day.